Welcome back to Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality, more than just getting deep. I'm your host, Enzi, and this week we will be discussing navigating the winter holidays living in multi-faith homes. So I want to start off by saying this podcast episode is an episode perhaps I never thought I would do. I haven't mentioned it too much on this podcast, but I am a Jew by choice. And when I was growing up and raised, one of the things about the Christian text in the Newer Testament, particularly in Corinthians, it says you should not be unequally yoked with non-believers. And so for me, I never thought, one, that I wouldn't be identifying as a Christian, but two, that I would be married and in a relationship with someone whose beliefs is not the same as mine. One of the things that has been complicated, or not really complicated, but one of the conversations we have constantly had is, what does this mean for our children? For us as adults, we are able to make decisions. We are able to be our own individuals. And children do not have the capacity to do those things, do not have the ability financially, emotionally, and sometimes mentally, but particularly as we're rearing our kids, as we're raising them, this question around how do we do this in a multi-faith home? For me, it's been clear, and as I started to ask this question more with other folks, it became less clear. For me, it's really important that my children are raised in a Jewish home and raised Jewish. And it's also important for me that they have connection and relationship with their grandparents as well as their other family members who are not Jewish. I also want to name the reality of the possibility of having multi-faith homes. One of my friends who is currently in a multi-faith home but also was raised in a multi-faith home had some really good advice to give to parents who may be navigating multi-faith homes. And one of the things that he said is make sure that you are giving your kids equitable access to their entire background and that how it's done is decided between parents. Also be flexible and know that you will know what is right for your family even if it's different than the shoulds others throw at you. And you can be a member as can your kids of multiple religious communities. I think that's really powerful. For one, we oftentimes, and in some ways maybe I'm kind of alluded to, but we oftentimes look at children as not being able to make decisions or not having an opinion about one thing or another. I really believe that one of the aspects of holidays, or one of the things that makes for me easier to navigate through the winter holidays is I don't have children, right? So we don't have to celebrate. We don't celebrate. We celebrate Hanukkah, but that's not with our kids because we don't have children and kids. Likewise with Christmas, we have nieces and nephews who we get Christmas gifts for when possible, and it is this balance around gatherings. What happens when, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas, when it falls on Hanukkah, when there's other activities that I have to navigate with as well. The other piece around winter holidays is food. Food is really important thing. Food is really important in many different aspects, and when we think about the ways in which holidays are very much centered around food. And so for me, I will be honest and say, as oftentimes, and I've heard this from other Jewish folks who may be more or less kosher, and that is really navigating bringing food. Do you bring food to the family gathering or do you not? What does that look like? Do you decide not to eat if you're there? These are really questions that I don't always have the answer to. And yet, these are some things that is constantly in the process of having to navigate through. I really don't have all the answers for this conversation about multi-faith families. What I do know, though, is that we have a long way to go, even within our Jewish community, around multi-faith families, multi-faith homes. How do we operate and navigate around those things? Now, I will say this. A challenging part about multi-faith homes is when one religion claims to be the one and only true religion. How do you navigate that? How do we balance that with that's not always the case, and I'm sure that parents can have this conversation with their children if that's the case. And right now, I don't want to just focus on children because I don't have children. So really thinking about what is your values? How do you want to navigate through the winter holidays? How do we do that? We talked about Hanukkah, we talked about Christmas. We didn't talk about all the other holidays, right? But we have the solstice. And for me, I also have been celebrating Kwanzaa for and Kwanzaa is just a little different because it's not really a religious holiday at all. So one of the things really that's so important about family, as we navigate winter holidays, I want to name a few things. Grief. Grief is big. In fact, grief is ripping through our community so much right now. There are so many people who I care about and hold dear who are grieving. And that makes navigating through holidays even that much more complex. Because grief is really almost always present at times, but particularly during the winter holidays. The days are getting shorter, the nights are getting longer, it's getting colder, and things seems to be in flux at times when thinking about the winters. I am an avid fan of Doctor Who. Folks know me, they know that that's one of my major special interests. I could quote so many of the different episodes. But one of the episodes that I distinctly remember, I believe it was David Tennant, and the words was, "It's Christmas. We're halfway out of the dark." And so I have been constantly thinking about that for the last several years now. What does it mean to be halfway out of the dark? As Jews in Hanukkah, we celebrate the light and lighten, and the light lasting for 8 days. And that's a very beautiful thing. And as we navigate these holidays and these times, it's really important to be mindful of individuals, to be mindful of nuances, because this time is hard for everybody. It is difficult, and as we grieve and make sense of our current time and the future, it can become complicated. It can become strained and harsh. Because when we're grieving and hurting, it is much easier to hurt other people around us. And so I don't have any magical words for advice about how to navigate through the winter holidays. What I do know is that when I think about holidays, I think about family, I think about love, and how do we navigate continuing to shine our light for others. There's a lot of work to do, and I'm here for it. I think we, as a community, can do a lot of work. We can allow for multiplicities of voices. We can allow for, in many ways, we can allow for multiplicity of voices while honoring our ancestors and our tradition in some very real ways. Again, this is Enzi, your host. Thank you for listening to Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality, more than just skin deep. See y'all next time. Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality, more than just skin deep, is a part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. You can email the show at podcast@tcjewfolk.com. For more information, go to tcjewfolk.com/podcast.